Okay guys, here we go with the last video for Practica 6 this semester, our last informative class before taking final tests, turning in portfolios, and closing up the semester. So this video is based on how to assess writing, still continuing with Brown as our reference. Just in general, if you remember back from, I think it was Practica 4, where we saw teaching writing, we tend to focus on genres in writing more than sub-skills, even though there are sub-skills like handwriting and like coherence and cohesion. We tend to focus more on writing for specific purposes and genres. So here we have some of those that we could possibly teach our students to write for. We have academic writing, things like papers, essays, technical reports, for example. Job-related writing like emails, memos, advertisements, and so on. And personal writing like, well, this is a little bit behind the times, right? But we could say Instagram posts, Facebook posts, Twitter things, financial documents that suggest here, medical reports, or even fiction like short stories or poetry. So the first one thing we want to think about with writing is what's our genre, what's our purpose, and who is the audience that we're having our students write for. When we get into more extensive and types of writing tasks. Assessing writing has 4 different categories, just like the other skills that we've seen so far. Well, the macro and micro skills, I'm not going to really go into them, but you can kind of look through some of the specific skills that you could work on with your students. And here we get into the first type of assessing writing, which is imitative, just like we've seen in the others. And it starts out just like speaking, right? And that this is very parrot-like. So we call it parrot-like in speaking, where they just repeat. And in imitative writing, it's very similar. They just repeat, right? So they look at the word and they write the word that they see. So this is something that we might do with especially elementary students who are just learning how to write. We have them just copy down the word. We work at a letter level. So you might have them just practicing specific letters or completing words with the letters that are missing. Spelling tests would be an example of imitative writing. And in this part, meaning or communicating a message isn't really important. It's just the mechanics of writing. So I think these are things that we do in schools. Here's an example. The students copy the word exactly. Close listening. Here you can have another example. This has started to complicate some of you that skills are integrated, right? And so even though this is a listening activity, it also tests their writing skills, that they can write the word that they heard and hopefully write it also correctly. Converting numbers and abbreviations into words. I think this is also something we see pretty typically with exactly these types of examples with the time, that they can write 9 o'clock, 5:45, or 5:45, depending upon your preference. Here we have another example of imitative, because here the words right there, they just have to complete it. And again, here we see integrated skills because reading is necessary to fulfill this task, but writing as well, that they copy the word correctly and distinguish between these different phonemes. Soap, 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 soup, right? That they can fill in the correct one. Other imitative tasks might include picture cued, typical look at the picture and write the vocabulary word, right? Which again is also considered for reading sometimes if the word's right there. Form completion, spelling test, which we already said, and writing words by understanding phonemic symbols. This isn't something we do much in schools. However, it would be considered an imitative task. The second kind, I think this is what we mostly do, imitative, intensive, which is controlled writing practice. And here we're using appropriate vocabulary within a context, writing with a length of a complete sentence, no more than that, yeah, with grammatically correct features. So we tell them, right, write a sentence using the past simple. There's a focus on form here. Meaning is slightly important, but generally not assessed at this point because they're not really communicating a message. They're following the rules that you've given them. So some examples are grammatical transformation tasks. You see this a lot. Where the students have to change the tenses in a paragraph or a sentence, right? So the sentence says, I go to the supermarket, and you ask the students to write it in past tense. I went to the supermarket. These are the beginnings of writing. This is intensive. Changing full forms of verbs to reduced forms so they can make contractions. Changing statements into yes, no, or WH questions. So for example, you give them the statement, I buy pretzels. I don't know why pretzels, but I buy pretzels. And they have to write, do you buy pretzels, right? Or who is buying pretzels? And they have to change the statements into questions, or vice versa, change questions into statements. So these are all transformation tasks, combining two sentences into one using a relative pronoun, right? Which, that, as an example. Change direct speech into direct speech or vice versa, and changing active to passive voice or vice versa. These are all the beginnings of writing tasks. They're intensive, but again, not necessarily as engaging. If you remember, we studied back in Practica 4 how to teach writing. We talked about writing for writing and writing for learning. All of these tasks are going to be writing for learning tasks because they're learning the grammar of it, but they're not really, any of them are real writing for writing tasks. There's no real world kind of purpose, and they're not going to be as engaging for students as things that have a genre, an audience, and a purpose. Some examples of intensive writing tasks: picture cued sentence writing. We saw picture cued and imitative as well, but it was only with a word. And now picture cued writing, but with a sentence. Typical present continuous, you see a picture of lots of people doing things and they have to describe what's in the picture. He is riding a bike, he is waking up, he's watching TV, she's eating dinner, and so on, describing the picture. Here's another picture cued story sequence. The information is all there for them. Vocab writing tasks. So here they're given the words and they're asked to write a sentence using those two words. That's also intensive. Putting the words in the correct order. We do this a lot in the classroom. That's an intensive writing type of task. Again, meaning is not really the important thing here. They don't necessarily know what the meaning of the sentence is. They might or they might not, but they do know the order of verbs and nouns, adjectives, for example. Short answer sentence completion, when they're completing a dialogue here. And then we come to responsive. And responsive is when we really can get into a specific type of genre and can start writing for writing. Here we can have students connect sentences into a paragraph and organizing even 2 or 3 paragraphs. So intensive is still writing at a sentence level. When we get into paragraph level, independent of what kind of task it is, it's going to be responsive. Brief narratives, descriptions, summaries, brief responses to reading. These are more focused on discourse conventions than the fundamentals of grammar. So we're going to be more focused on the coherence of their response and meaning rather than grammar. Whereas intensive, we were more focused on form. Context and meaning are assessed here, and we'd start using definitely rubrics to grade responsive type of writing assessment, whereas in imitative and intensive, we still possibly, most likely, would work with a point system where points are assigned for the correct use of form, the correct word, the correct letters, and so on and so forth. And the last kind of type of writing assessment is extensive. This one we probably will not do at a high school level unless we work in a private school with a very high level. But here they're going to use all of the processes and strategies for writing. So you've seen the writing process, right, where they have to do a pre-writing and an outline and a draft and edit and proofread and then write another draft. Well, that's what we're talking about with extensive. A complete text, writing an essay, a report, a thesis. You might start focusing on their word choice and the tone and things like that. That would be extensive. But again, we're probably not going to see very much of this in schools. We'll probably only get to the level of responsive, writing paragraphs or a couple paragraphs, focusing on meaning, but probably about there. Some ideas for responsive and extensive tasks include paraphrasing, that they can read a story, put it in their words, or listen to a text, put it in their words. Guided question and answer on an open topic or based on, again, an input from a reading, listening, movie. Paragraph construction tasks, where they have to write a descriptive paragraph based on a stimulus, an image, for example, and attending to a task or a genre. So writing a letter, writing an email, writing a Facebook post. So again, there's a concrete task, purpose, genre, and audience. And that would be it concerning assessing writing. So we'll be practicing in class.